Welcome dear friends to yet another lecture on the history of English language and literature. In our previous lecture, we have introduced the Victorian poetry, and today we shall discuss the most important poet of the Victorian era. He is Alfred Lord Tennyson. Alfred Lord Tennyson, he lived from 1809 to 1892. Alfred Lord Tennyson, he was the leading poet of the Victorian era. And as a poet, he is the most representative of the age. Why he is the representative of the age? Because the mental outlook and the emotion of Tennyson, it was the same as the feelings of his audience. So the feelings of the audience of the Victorian era is represented in his writings. The Victorian era is reliving in his writings. He is also the most representative poet of the 19th century because he lived during most part of the century. He lived from 1809 to 1892. It is also said that Tennyson was to Victorian England what Edmund Spenser had been to Elizabethan England. He is also compared to Milton. He is the most conscientious and the most accomplished poetic artist after Milton. So one of the leading poets or the leading poets of the Victorian era, Alfred Lord Tennyson. Now Tennyson, he went to the Cambridge University and he left the university without taking a degree. Now his only achievement at Cambridge University was that he won the Chancellor's Medal. He won the Chancellor's Medal for a poem on Timbuktu. The subject theme was Timbuktu, and he will win the Chancellor's Medal. After he left the university, he spent 20 long years living chiefly with his parents and writing plenty of poetry, writing a lot of poetry. Tennyson was appointed Poet Laureate in 1850 in succession to William Wordsworth. After Wordsworth, it is Tennyson. In 1884, he was created a baron and sat in the House of Lords. Now, baron is the member of the lowest order of nobility, and we have learned in our previous classes that the House of Lords consisted of the members of the nobility. So, he was a member of the House of Lords. He died in 1892 and is buried at Westminster Abbey. He was regarded as the greatest poet of his times, greatest poet of the Victorian times. Lord Tennyson was influenced by Romanticism, and Tennyson lived at a time when Romanticism had reached its peak, the highest point. We have learned about Romanticism in our previous semester. So, Romanticism influenced Tennyson. Now, he was the poetic exponent of the cautious spirit of Victorian liberalism. Victorian liberalism. Liberalism gives a lot of importance to protecting and enhancing individual freedom. And he advocated a cautious spirit. Amidst the liberal spirit of the Victorian era, he was advocating a cautious spirit. Tennyson preferred tradition to new belief system. We know in the Victorian era there is this conflict, compromise. There was a lot of tussle going on between the old and the new. While preferring the old belief system, he was greatly interested in the theory of evolution. So there is a new system, but he did not lose his religious faith. The theory of evolution only cemented or increased or strengthened his belief. So there is a tussle between the old system and the new system, and he is clinging on, he is holding on to the old traditional system. At the same time, he is also accepting the theory of evolution that is proposed by Charles Darwin. The theory of evolution only strengthened his belief. He did not lose his faith. He was a recluse. Who is a recluse? A person who lives a solitary life, lonely life. And he was an aristocrat. So he was a recluse who lived a solitary life. At the same time, he was interested in people and in common things of life. So we see a compromise two things coming together in Tennyson. It was characteristic of the time. Now we shall discuss some of the important works of Alfred Lord Tennyson. Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote for more than 60 years. He was interested in the classical, he was interested in the romantics, and he was interested in the modern subjects. All the subjects he was interested in. He wrote about humble and rustic life. He was interested in English history and Celtic legends. He was also deeply interested in philosophy and religion. So Tennyson was a poet who could deal with all these diverse subjects, who could deal with all these diverse different ideas that dominated the Victorian era. So the different subjects, different themes, different ideas, everything we can see in Alfred Lord Tennyson's writings. The first work that we can remember is Locksley Hall, which was written in 1842. Now this particular poem, Locksley Hall, it embodies the restless spirit of the young England. It talks about faith in science, faith in commerce, and faith in the progress of mankind. Tennyson held on to the traditional faith. At the same time, he put his trust in the new ideas of science, scientific growth, etc. So he trusted in science, he trusted in commerce, he trusted in the human growth, human progress. Now, Locksley Hall, 60 years after, which was written in 1886, it was a sequel to Locksley Hall. Now, in this, the second part of this poem, Tennyson shows revulsion or dislike to many things he idealized in the beginning of his life, which he idealized in Locksley Hall. In Locksley Hall, he had praised science, he had praised commerce, he had praised the progress of mankind. Now, in 1886, he began to realize that science had destroyed the faith of many and the commerce had the greed of gain. So we see a shifting tendency in Tennyson, a shifting tendency. Now this was characteristic of most of the other poets as well. There is a shifting tendency. What he believed early in his life, now he is discarding. There is a shifting tendency. In 1847, he would write The Princess. Now this poem had many pressing contemporary issues of the times. It portrayed the concerns of the times, mainly the higher education of women and the status of women in modern society. It is sympathized with the concerns that women had in the Victorian times. So, The Princess. In 1850, Alfred Lord Tennyson would publish or would write the Memoriam. Now it is a long, very long poem, and Tennyson is best remembered for this work, Memoriam. It is an elegy on the death of Arthur Hallam, a close friend of Tennyson. So it is a meditative poem, long poem, and it deals with the crisis of death. Now this poem was greatly admired by even Queen Victoria herself. His other significant works include Mood, which was published in 1855, Idylls of the King, which was published between 1859 and 1885, The May Queen, which was published in 1855, Enoch Garden, and Dora, which was published in 1842. There were some short poems that he wrote which he published in 1830. Poems chiefly lyrical, which was published in 1830. The collection includes the introspective, the owl, the kraken, and some of Tennyson's best known shorter poems, including Claribel, a Melody, Mariana, and A Spirit Haunts the Year's Last Hours, etc. Tennyson is also remembered for The Lady of Shalott, which was published in 1832, and Tears, Idle Tears, which was published in 1847. Tennyson was unlike Wordsworth and other romantics. He could see the nature with the eyes of the poet, at the same time with the eyes of the scientist. His approach to nature was more realistic, not imaginative. He loved the beauty of nature. At the same time, he was aware of the indifference and cruelty that nature was capable of. The beauty of nature as well as the cruelty of nature. Thus we see a rational temperament in Tennyson, not an imaginative temperament. The poems of Tennyson had two voices of the century, the voice of faith as well as the voice of doubt. So both these voices, the voices of faith and the voices of doubt, were in conflict with one another in the Victorian times and in the poetry of Lord Tennyson. So he is the representative poet of the times. The Ancient Sage, which was published in 1885. Now this poem challenged the materialism of the age and asserted the eternal verities of God and immortality. Tennyson showed faith in God and religion throughout his life. Tithonus, Ulysses and the Lotus Eaters. Now through these poems, Lord Tennyson returns to the Greek and Roman legends. Ulysses is of supreme importance. So my dear students, we are discussing Alfred Lord Tennyson and some of the important works of Alfred Lord Tennyson. Tennyson derived material for his poetry from his own age and from his own country. Victorian England relives in his writings. England was disturbed in his ways, we know, but Tennyson remained unaffected. We have learned about Victorian compromise. His poetry is a long lesson in peace and restraint. The spirit of Victorian compromise is seen in his political and religious outlook. In the description of the nature, there is a blend of scientific observation as well as poetic feeling. Pictorial quality, perfection of style, wonderful mastery of language, and varied music of words are the striking features of the poetry of Alfred Tennyson. Alfred Lord Tennyson was interested in historical past. He was interested in mythological past. He had faith in God, he had faith in religion. He could also engage with science and religion. Now, he was interested in nature and he will present a realistic description of nature. Altogether, or in short, Alfred Lord Tennyson could be considered as a typical Victorian. Therefore, he can be called as the most representative figure of the 19th century or the most representative figure of the Victorian era. So my dear students, we have discussed in short a very important poet of the Victorian times, the most representative poet of the Victorian times, Alfred Lord Tennyson. We have discussed the varied works of Alfred Lord Tennyson in a gist. We have talked about some of the characteristics of the poetry of Alfred Lord Tennyson. Alfred Lord Tennyson is a very important poet of the Victorian times, and for your assignment, please write a summary of who Alfred Lord Tennyson was, what were some of the important poetical works of Alfred Lord Tennyson, and also mention how the Victorian era, how the Victorian times is represented in the writings of Alfred Lord Tennyson, how the Victorian times is relived in the writings of Alfred Lord Tennyson, the compromise, the Victorian compromise, the tension between the rich and the poor, the tension between the religion and science, the tussle between different ideas. All this was characteristic of the Victorian times, and all these characteristics are contained in the writings of Alfred Lord Tennyson. He is the most representative poet of the Victorian times, is the most representative poet of the 19th century. Thank you for your patient listening. Hope to meet you again with another lecture soon. Have a nice time.